So good afternoon, everybody. We are here as we are heading home for the 4th of July weekend. We're all getting ready to celebrate freedom, independence, our liberty. I'm sure you've all seen it at the Korean War Memorial, engraved in stone. Freedom is not free, and that is something we're all going to be celebrating. As you know, the sacrifices of our military is what has kept us free for hundreds of years, not just in our country, of course, but all around the world. I had the opportunity to travel with a couple of my Democratic colleagues, Senator Coons, Senator Duckworth, recently in Korea, Taiwan. You go to those countries and you feel that sense of pride as an American, because there's no way you would have those economically vibrant democracies without the sacrifice of our military. It's safe to say, actually, that hundreds of millions of people around the world have been freed from oppression and tyranny because of the U.S. military. That's a fact. And, of course, it costs money. Budgets are a reflection of an administration's values and priorities. Many of us believe that defending our nation should be the _1 priority, and what we are here to talk about and highlight is when you look at the $6 trillion Biden blowout, where they prioritize military spending, the Department of Defense spending for our military. It's not just prioritized #1 or #2 relative to all the other federal agencies. It is dead last. Dead last. When you look at where the inflation numbers are, it's actually a cut of almost 3%. That and Homeland Security. Everything else, double digit. Military, dead last and dangerous. Last week we had the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, Secretary Austin, in front of the Armed Services Committee, and I had the opportunity to ask him, how do you tell our troops that we are prioritizing our military? And the answer is you can't. The Biden administration is not. Just look at the budget. Just look at the numbers. So, like so many things here, like so much else with this administration, the fingerprints of the far left are all over this budget. You know, since the end of the Vietnam War, the far left of the Democratic Party has really been the anti-military party. And if you remember last summer, we passed this out. Some of you may have seen this. This was Bernie Sanders' amendment to the NDAA. It was literally called the Defund the Pentagon Amendment. 14% across the board cuts. Chuck Schumer was a co-sponsor of that. We defeated it, but unfortunately now that they're in power, Senate Majority Leader, Chairman of the Budget Committee, they might have the last laugh. But of course, this is no laughing matter. Tomorrow, some of you might know, June 25th, is the 71st anniversary of the beginning of the Korean War. The summer of 1950, thousands of Americans died because our forces weren't ready, because military leaders, uniform and civilian, had dramatically cut our defense budgets and they weren't prioritizing our military. We can never let that happen again. We are here to call on the President to prioritize our national security, our troops, particularly as we head into this Independence Day weekend, and importantly, and we want you and the media to do this too, talk to our pro-defense Democrat senators. See if they support this. I can tell you they don't. I've talked to many of them. See what they think. So we are calling on them to fight for a real budget that dramatically increases, not cuts, dead last, our military spending. This is a huge issue for our party, should be for all Americans, should be bipartisan, and I'm proud to have all my so many of my Senate colleagues here. I'm going to have Senator Scott talk next on...
Before he talks...
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, come on in.
Yeah, well, the only reason I'm jumping in front of you here is I was supposed to be here at the beginning of this to kick this off because, as I think most of you know, and if you don't, you need to know, that Senator Sullivan is the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee. I was the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee for a number of years up to that point. that's a subcommittee is more directly involved with the budget. It's got to be abundantly clear to everyone what this president has done to the budget, to the defense budget. Here we're looking at a budget that has a massive increase, they sometimes say, of 1.6%, while every other part of the budget is between 16 and 20%. So it's very important that you folks are fully aware of this. And this group up here is kind of leading the effort to make sure that you are aware of it. The most important thing going on in America today is what's happening to the military under this administration. Thank you. Sorry we were late.
Okay. First off, I want to thank Senator Sullivan for organizing this press conference. You know, I was proud of my dad. He did all the combat jumps in the Second World War as a member of the 82nd Airborne. He never thought he was going to come back alive. I had the opportunity. He told me how great the food was, so I joined the Navy. So I had the opportunity to serve in the Navy. I joined it at 18. Got the GI Bill, and I've got a grandson my first grandson, I'm sure, is going to be in the military. He loves the military, and he loves it because he knows it's how we defend this country. I'm on armed services. I'm proud to be on armed services. We have 20 military bases, 3 unified commands in my state. I'm proud to be on it because I believe it's the most important thing we do up here. As we've been having these hearings, as we go through this reckless budget that the Biden administration has come out with, what I ask people is, let's look around the world. Is it getting safer? Are our enemies, our adversaries doing more to cause problems? Is China doing less or more? Russia, Iran? Look at what Hamas has done. North Korea's not stopped what they're doing. So we've got to understand that it's not getting better. China is not backing down. They've increased their defense budget 7-fold in 10 years. Their plan is to dominate, start the Indo-Pacific, I think, plan to dominate the world. Look at what they're doing with Taiwan. They're constantly doing flights over Taiwan. They're threatening Taiwan. They said they're going to take Taiwan back. So, I mean, this is not getting better. And so, and then in the meantime, what they're doing, look at what Obama did in his years, and then now look at Biden. You can look at the chart. Senator Sullivan put this together, but look at go back and look at the Biden Obama years where they cut spending. And what you heard about was when President Trump got elected, the military was not ready for anything. I mean, everything was depleted. You talk to behind-the-scene military leaders today, what they'll tell you is that we still haven't caught up. And China is still growing. And if they continue to grow their economy, it's going to be tough. So I've got a resolution that's condemning Biden's decision to reduce defense spending and urge the Biden administration to work with us to make sure our military has all the resources they need. The most important thing we can do up here is make sure that this country can defend the freedoms that our forefathers fought for and many lost their lives for. And I'm proud of what my family has done. My dad did, in particular, what he did. And he didn't do it to have a defense budget that can't defend the freedoms that he cared about for us.
Thank you. Senator Wood.
Thank you very much. This is the most important subject that we could be talking about today as we approach the Independence Day holiday. And if you look at those figures, look at that chart, it says a lot. The 2 items at the bottom are the items that keep Americans safe, that provide security for every American, and not only help us to win a conflict if that should happen. The spending there is designed to keep us out of a war, to make us so strong and so resilient that nobody will think about challenging us in a kinetic way. Russia hasn't retreated. China hasn't retreated. There's a huge buildup there. This represents a recommendation that we retreat. And let me say this about bipartisanship. I think we can have bipartisanship on this issue. We need it. And when I talk to members of the Senate from states where we build submarines, where we build ships, where we build the aircraft carriers, the littoral vessels, we are unified that we need to protect the country and that we need also to protect American jobs and our industrial base. We ask the experts that come before our committee, what do we need? And they will tell us that they have told us in testimony, these 2 figures below are inadequate They absolutely represent a cut in our ability to defend ourselves because we don't even keep up with inflation. We asked the acting Secretary of the Navy yesterday about a decision he had made to cut one of our ships. He very sorrowfully said it was a tough decision. I just didn't have the money. Let me say this to the Secretary. He has to answer to the President. But the Congress has the power of the purse. And the President's suggestion with regard to these figures is not the last word. We have the ability and should exercise that ability on a bipartisan basis to reverse this. You ask the experts, can you defend this nation on the cheap? They tell us in hearings, no, we can't defend this nation on the cheap. You ask the admirals and the generals, as I did yesterday in a hearing, do we need more ships or fewer ships? And they will tell you flatly the Navy and the Marine Corps and our nation's DOD needs more ships. We cannot defend our nation. We cannot prevent war with these figures. I think we'll have a bipartisan majority to reverse this, to exercise our constitutional right of the power of the purse and reverse these unfortunate, disastrous, dangerous defense cuts.
You know, these numbers, these charts, that really clearly says it all. And the Biden administration, you know, they use words like adequate and sufficient to describe the defense budget. You know, just when in the world did we start using these words of adequate when we are talking about the benchmark for our national defense? This is so concerning. The defense budget, you know, it's going to lead to serious national defense setbacks is what it's going to do. And it certainly sends the message to our adversaries to believe our warfighters that they no longer have the upper hand, is the message that this sends. And the cuts to the Navy, to the Coast Guard, shipbuilding, it is just laid right out there for you. And, you know, as we do head into this holiday, this Independence Day, the last thing we need to be doing is cutting this budget. We should be proud of those who fought for this country, but we certainly should be supporting those who fought for this country. And, you know, we all know the cost of freedom. The president and the Democrats, they should go commit beyond adequate, which infuriates me when I hear that word, to give our warfighters and aircraft, ships, equipment the training they deserve. We need to be bold. We need to be standing strong for the military. We are not sending the right message right now. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today and just hearing some of our concerns about President Biden's budget when it comes to our national defense. And I served overseas during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Dan, you served as well. We're veterans of the global war on terror. Rick, you have served as well. You look at the breadth of knowledge of those of us that have served in uniform, now serving in the United States Senate and on our Senate Armed Services Committee, and you'll hear the same thing from each one of us. Dan, you were good to bring up Korea. As we are approaching that anniversary, the folks that were engaged in Korea, those units were not manned, they were not equipped, and they were not trained. And we saw devastating effects because of that. Now, what President Biden's budget is doing to our military is preparing us for a time where we will not be manned, trained, or equipped. And oftentimes we get caught up in the grand scale of our federal government and what we're providing at the strategic level. But folks, all of that trickles down to that end user. That end user is that airman, is that sailor, that Marine, that soldier. And if we are not providing for them, we're not providing for their success. So when we're going through the budget, and I've got some interesting numbers here, President Biden has actually proposed nearly $80 million to double the size of the IRS. It's 87,000 more tax agents, right? But he's slashing the Army budget by $3 billion. And the resulting troop reductions there would leave us with the same sized Army that we had on 9/11 of 2001. One that's less ready and one that has older equipment, used equipment, not modernized equipment. So I would just ask this president that when we face another 9/11, as we see our troops coming out of Afghanistan, I just met with President Ghani downstairs, so did Senator Inhofe. And one of his security advisors stated, one of President Ghani's security advisors stated, we hear over and over again the sentence that President Biden says, we hope to prevent Afghanistan from ever being a safe haven for terrorists. That security advisor said, it is a safe haven for terrorists. The global war on terror is not over. Are we prepared for another 9/11? If that happens, will President Biden, will he call on our armed forces, or will he be calling on the IRS?
Great, thank you. Senator Ernst, any questions? Yes.
In practical and legislative, in terms of practical and the legislative process terms, what can you do? One, to convince those Democrats who you think are also in agreement that the budget is too low. What can you do to change the situation practically and legislatively?
Well, look, I'll take a crack at that. Obviously, the president proposes, the Congress disposes. We have the final word on the budget. And I will tell you, the admirals and generals don't like this budget. Okay? They don't. They can't come up and testify that they don't, but we talk to them. They're not pleased with this. Importantly, I believe, and I've had conversations, there's a number of Senate Democrats who do not like the fact that we are not prioritizing the military at all. So we can certainly push for a top line in the NDAA as we move that through the Armed Services Committee, and on the Appropriations Committee, we can and we are planning to significantly plus this up. But look at this chart. Look at this chart. There's no way this administration can say, and it was difficult for Secretary Austin, I have a lot of respect for him, served with him, General Milley too, there's no way they can look at us, they tried to do it last week, and say, we prioritize our military relative to other elements of the federal budget. They don't. It's a $6 trillion blowout, and our military right now is dead last. And I think there's bipartisan support to increase it. The challenge is, as I mentioned, the far left of the Democratic Party is ascendant, and they don't like the military. My understanding, maybe you guys in the press have better intel than I do, the original budget proposal was a 10% cut, and that the DOD members fought back to get to about a 3% with inflation cut. So that's the battle. It's between moderate, pro-defense Democrats and the far left. And right now, Bernie Sanders, Chuck Schumer, what they did last summer, which was, again, take a look at it, an amendment that was a 14% across-the-board cut to our military. That's what they wanted. Senator Sanders called it, tongue-in-cheek, his defund the Pentagon amendment when they were all motivated on defund the police. That's the tension. It's not with us. We're going to continue to press to make this a much stronger budget for our military. The tension is between the far left of the Democratic Party and the moderate pro-defense senators.
If I may, quick follow-up. I know this is maybe too far ahead, but will it get to a situation where you would have to withhold your votes for must-pass bills, like defense authorization and defense appropriations, if you face resistance from the Democrats. So
I-
obviously we'll need your votes to pass.
I won't speculate on that. I'll let my colleagues talk to it, but I will say that if you listen to what Republican senators are talking about, whether it's Mitch McConnell, the head of the NRSC, all of our leadership, we are very focused on this issue because the American people are focused on this issue. We think national defense should be the top priority of the Congress, not the last priority. And I think we have the American people behind us on this. So, and I think there'll be tough votes for Democratic senators from states, Virginia, Georgia. Think about those states. Very pro, Arizona, very pro-military states. And right now, they got to go home and talk about this. That's going to be tough.
Very tough.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a specific number in mind for what you said you're looking at plussing up?
So the National Defense Commission, that was the bipartisan commission that came to the Congress in 2018, bipartisan on the Armed Services Committee, has proposed real 3 to 5% increases every year. That was the bipartisan agreement that we had on the Armed Services Committee. The vast majority of the members have agreed to that. Interestingly, a number of the Biden administration nominees for senior defense positions were on that commission. So again, we know that in the DoD side, they were pushing for this 3 to 5% real increase. That was the bipartisan agreed upon approach. A number of the administration officials agreed to it. I've talked to them. They just didn't win out in their budget battles, which again is a reflection on the president and his overall administration. Yes, yep, go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. I wanted to ask, so I believe that we spent about $2 trillion in Afghanistan trying to push out terrorists, and now it seems like they're already flooding back in. Is there concern that if this budget goes lower, that your long term, it's going to have to increase quite a bit to make up for lost ground?
Well, look, and again, my colleagues jump in here. If you look at this chart right here, so this was, as Senator Scott mentioned, the red is China. So they're increasing about 10% a year, okay? And they're going to keep doing that. The blue is us. That's where we've increased or decreased. The second term of the Biden administration, defense spending was cut by 25%. 25%. Readiness plummeted, to your point. We tried to build it up during the Trump administration when the Senate Republicans were in power. And now, as I mentioned, we're going back to these cuts. What you can't keep doing is whipsawing the military because these are just numbers, but what they equate to is readiness. And when we got to the Senate in 2015, after those dramatic cuts, the readiness of our forces was at some of the lowest levels we had seen in decades. And again, to Senator Ernst's point, we need to be ready. And what Senator Scott's been focused on, like a laser, is the challenge with China. I asked the question in the hearings over the last 2 weeks, putting these charts out. If we keep this spending level up and the Chinese continue that, are we going to fall behind dramatically the pacing threat that we face with regard to China? In pretty much every witness, again, the Biden administration's witnesses said yes. So that's what we're facing. It's pretty clear.
And if I could
Go ahead.
add to that, obviously our strategy has shifted to near peer adversaries. But we still face those violent extremist organizations, or we need to engage in counterterrorism operations. Afghanistan is the prime example. The American public, while it's really popular to pull our troops out of Afghanistan, most of the American population doesn't understand we have only, or had only, a few thousand troops on the ground in Afghanistan. So the American public believes that we will see substantial cost savings by pulling out of Afghanistan, and that is not necessarily the truth of the matter. I've spoken to a number of high-ranking officials in Central Command, and they have all stated those costs just shift elsewhere. So now we're basing troops in other areas. We're doing over-the-horizon activities. So there's not a significant cost savings there. We're still going to be engaging. We still have those violent extremist organizations out there. we have to be prepared and we have to provide the necessary resources.
Yes, sir.
Ernst kind of answered my question before I asked it, but, I guess the question that perhaps many Americans have is if we're coming out of Afghanistan, if
Yeah.
you're not fighting that war, why do you need more money than when you were fighting a war in Afghanistan and Iraq and all the other things? Like, aren't you taking one thing off the
Yeah.
list?
Well, look, I think, when you look at, and again, this was very bipartisan. The Trump administration put forward its national security strategy and national defense strategy that said, hey, we need to start reorienting our focus from a national security perspective. We got to keep an eye on the violent extremist organizations, which was the focus after 9/11. But the great power competition we are now seeing, particularly with regard to China, is the pacing threat, the pacing challenge. That reorientation has been embedded in the last two NDAAs, and it's been very bipartisan. So the challenge is right there. The challenge is this budget actually shrinks the Navy's fleet by one ship this year. We're shrinking the fleet of the United States Navy. There is nobody in the national security realm, experts, who think that that is sustainable in terms of our competition with China. So I would say there's a reorientation towards great power competition. Russia and China is the pacing threat. That is strongly bipartisan in terms of the focus. What we need to do, though, is appropriately fund it, and we're not doing that.
Well, if our allies were growing, it's like, all right, if Australia, Great Britain, Japan, they were all growing, that would be totally different. But who's growing is our adversary. I mean, they clearly want to dominate, starting the Indo-Pacific, but they want to dominate the world. And so we're going to have to be in a position to defend ourselves or not. And if you look at the Navy as an example, every year we're not building new ships. Our fleet's aging pretty fast.
Yes.
Yesterday at the House hearing with Officer Lilly, Congressman Garamendi said life extending NMAT 3 and causing GPS to use for 17 years would save, in his words, north of $37 billion over 10 years. Would you trade yourself 15 years on GPS to use for 37?
On which system?
Ground-based.
Oh, the. Look, I mean, the one thing that this budget does focus on to some degree, and I'm not the expert on it, is the nuclear modernization, which again has been a bipartisan area. The Obama administration was focused on that. So to the extent that there is a focus on modernizing all three legs of the triad, that's where I am. The details I can get back to you on. I don't know if you have
Yes,
any
no, I would say no. We cannot trade that. We see that our nuclear deterrence, the triad is aging. And I recently was on a trip to Minot, North Dakota, and saw two legs of the triad and then down to Strategic Command at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. And the emphasis over and over again is that we cannot give on modernization. For too long, and many administrations, we were not as focused as we should have been on those modernization efforts, and it has set us much further behind than we should be even at this point. So if we delay for a dozen years, it would be extremely hard to catch back up. If you look at Russia, China, Iran's activities and what they want to do with enrichment, we can't afford that. We can't afford that.
The criticism that often leads to is that the Democrats and Republicans ask for more money on top of 15 billion, however much. That leads critics to say, these guys aren't willing to make hard choices. How do you respond to that?
So I think when you have the experts studying this, that was put forward with regard to the National Commission on National Defense, this was, again, a bipartisan group of experts came to the committee and said, we think, given the national security challenges, the China challenges, the Russia challenges, 3 to 5% GDP or growth in terms of the budget is a reasonable expectation in terms of defending our national security interests. Even as a percentage of GDP, these numbers, even today, even at 3 to 5% increases, are not even near historically high numbers of previous eras. So I think we can clearly do it. What you're seeing here, remember, this is a $6 trillion budget. They are increasing spending everywhere on everything, with one exception. So when a lot of these witnesses came and said, well, we have hard choices, the problem is it's not hard choices, it's what you prioritize. And that's the big issue. That's the big message we're sending. The prioritization of our military with this budget is last. That's a fact. Look at the numbers. So I think 3 to 5% annually is what is a bipartisan target that's sustainable, agreed upon. The military could use that. And I think if you went to most senators, they would agree with that on a bipartisan way. Sir.
Joe Gould from Defense News. We've seen some messaging, it's been a few weeks now, from Leader McConnell and now this group, but on the House side, when in years past, I think we have seen some messaging from the top level. We haven't seen that yet.
You mean on the House leadership?
On the House leadership side.
Yeah.
You know, the NRC, Rick Scott was here. Mr. McConnell spoke in. How about the House? Why do you think that we're not seeing that high-level messaging?
No, I'm not going to speak for the House. I can speak for the Senate. And as I mentioned, and you're giving examples, this is a priority of Senate Republicans. But I would encourage our friends in the media, ask some of the Senate Democrats. There's a number of them who aren't thrilled with this, I guarantee you. Ask them on it. So I think our concerns are bipartisan here in the Senate, but I can't speak to the House.
And just as a follow-up, under that 3 to 5% increase, is there a sense of what capabilities need to be added? What, is there any consensus yet on what kinds of, what parts of the budget need increasing under that top?
So I will tell you this. I think one area, particularly given the China threat, is that we do not want to have a shrinking Navy fleet. There was bipartisan vote, it's in law, on the 355-ship Navy, very bipartisan, by the way, and that goes to our industrial base, that goes to our national security, that goes to addressing the challenges with China. And this budget actually starts to shrink the size of the United States Navy. So it's going in the wrong direction, and Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are very pleased by that. We shouldn't be. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.